Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the RIFAR Marathon Checkpoint 1 webinar. First up, congratulations to all of you for taking the first step in registering for the challenge. It's the first of many steps. I think we're hoping that this first checkpoint really helps give you an introduction to the problem statement posed to you. We've got experts in the room here today that will walk you through how to dissect your problem, examples of adaptation solutions in Malaysia. And it's really an opportunity for you to pose any burning questions that you have at the Q&A session right at the end of today's session. I don't want to belabor or give you any big introductions. So just first up, I think I just like to introduce both of our guest speakers today. We have Professor Trevor Hoy from Brunel University, and we have Sofia Castello dialing in from Lisbon, an expert with Think City, Malaysia. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Trevor Hoy. He's a river scientist at Brunel University and Pro Vice Chancellor of International and Sustainability at Brunel. His research is in hydraulics and sediment transport, where he has combined field, lab, and modeling approaches to understand the mechanics of sediment transport and how these control landscape environments. Today, Professor Hoy will walk us through how to approach and understand river flooding in a catchment context. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Trevor.
Thanks very much, Pri. I'll let you share the slides. And yes, good afternoon, everyone. And as Pri said, well done for taking part and for wanting to be involved in this challenge. There we are. We have the slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about river flooding in a catchment context. Where does river flooding come from, and how do we deal with the problem at a particular place in terms of the sources of that flooding? First of all, next slide, please. Thanks. Pre-mentioned, I come from Brunel University in London. We're in London, at the west side of London. We're named after a very famous engineer, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. And Brunel wasn't a river engineer as such, but he built a lot of bridges over rivers and tunnels underneath them. And the importance in over many years of engineering solutions to flooding and flood risk is where we start from. And I think in the modern world, we're moving away from some of those purely engineering-based solutions and trying to have more holistic solutions to river flooding. Next slide, please. So we know that climate is changing. We know that flooding today is perhaps going to be different from flooding in the next 20, 50, 100 years. This is for the UK. The Environment Agency in the UK has produced this diagram that suggests we're going to have heavier rainfall in future, which will lead to increased peak river flows, but also increased drought conditions. We've got sea level rise effects, and we've got temperature effects coming together. And that's the context that we've got to plan for. And on the next slide are some of the same sort of figures for Malaysia. Projected climate change. If you haven't looked at this ADRC report, do have a look at it. It's got useful information about what the expected climate change in Malaysia is going to look like. And you see annual rainfall increase of 14 to 25% by 2100. We already have flooding issues in Malaysia, like shown in the photographs there. With increased annual rainfall, we're going to have more flooding unless ways can be found to manage that rainfall and manage the rivers to avoid it. Next slide, please. And importantly, across the world as a whole, we see that flooding is becoming more frequent. It isn't so much that floods are necessarily getting bigger, although in many places they are. It's that climate change is leading to floods happening more often. Everything blue on this map means that floods are going to happen more often in in 2100 than they did in 2000. And you see that much of the tropics through Latin America, through Africa, through Asia, Northern Australia, flooding is going to become more frequent. In some places, an extreme increase in frequency. So we have to deal with flooding happening more often, as well as possibly being larger in some places. Next slide, please. And of course, in our cities, this is what we've done to rivers. These aren't Malaysian examples. There's one from Brazil in the top left. The bottom left is Indonesia, and the one in the middle is from Singapore. And rivers are often straightened in cities to create space for other things. You see the Brazil photograph. There's a highway going right beside the river. You're creating space for other activities, buildings, factories, roads, airports, other infrastructure. And there are some benefits. What I've said, they're perceived benefits. Straightened rivers, the flow moves faster, it moves away, stops sedimentation, it creates space on the floodplain to do other things. However, there are issues. If the water moves faster away from your place, it's going to go to the next place downstream more quickly. The flooding problem is not solved. It is maybe mainly moved somewhere else. The rivers can be ecologically dead. The Brazil and Singapore cases there, that you would struggle to find much life in either of those. The rivers become disconnected from the floodplain. Sedimentation may continue. And if you straighten a river, you make it faster and you increase the risk of erosion. And so you have to then start protecting bridges, for example, or banks to stop them eroding. So the straightening rivers looks like a nice solution, but actually we know it creates a lot of problems as well. Next slide, please. And there are small examples. This is an example from the UK of a really small stream called the Whit Beck. In 2004, you can't really see where the stream is. It's underneath the line of trees that goes sort of top right to the mid left of the photograph. It's a small river going through farmland. It had been straightened. And downstream of this site is a town that gets flooded very, very often. And some really serious floods have occurred in that town. And so part of the management of those floods was to try to slow down the rate at which water goes downstream. And so the Whit Beck has been restored to what it used to look like 250 years ago before it was straightened. And on the right-hand side, you can see the current shape of the river. It bends around a bit. You can see the darker is where there's water, the lighter is where the sediment. You can see that the shape of the river has changed. It's a longer river. The water flows more slowly. And this has, to some extent, started to reduce the flood risk downstream. When you get very, very large events, though, very large floods, a small scheme like this is unlikely to make a very big difference. And the final point there is that restoration isn't just about improving flood risk. It's also about biodiversity. It's also about land use. And you need to think about all of those things together. Next slide, please. We also know, and lots of work has been done around the world that has shown when you start to protect a river and start to straighten it, you then have to take other measures as well. You protect one bit of the bank and then you have to do something else. This photograph is from some work that we did in Philippines over the last few years. And what it showed is that in 2017, part of the river bank was strengthened by building a flood wall. That caused Soon after that, there was erosion on the other side. So the wall on the right-hand side of the picture was built in 2021. As a result of that, there was some erosion further downstream. So there was another wall built in 2022. And guess what? There was some more erosion on the other side. So another wall was built in 2023. So you get these cascading consequences. You protect one bit and that deflects the flow somewhere else and can create erosion and can create flooding somewhere else. And you end up having to intervene in several places to try to address the problem. Next slide, please. And what's happening now is that people are looking at what happens if we remove some of those flood protection schemes. How much can we slow the flow down? How much can we protect communities and infrastructure downstream by reducing the amount of flood protection there is in some of the upstream areas? And I won't go into detail on this, but what was done in this project by the PhD student Pammy Tolentino, she ran computer models, 2D flow models with the flood protection in place, and then she took the flood protection out of the model and said, what difference does it make? And what you start to see there is that you create more space, you generate storage space that water can go into. And so it becomes or starts to move downstream more slowly. And so the communities further downstream have less water arriving at any one time. So the flood peak becomes somewhat lower. It also becomes more spread out. And you can actually reduce the flood risk significantly downstream by increasing storage upstream in the catchment. Next slide, please. But natural flood management of that sort doesn't solve all problems. And this diagram, little bit complicated at first sight. On the x-axis on the bottom is the size of flood from small to large, and going up is the how much difference in the flood peak from small at the bottom to large at the top as a result of different sorts of activity. So the line in the middle that we've said is called here floodplain storage is like that previous example where you're storing water on the floodplain, and that can be quite effective for medium-sized floods. But the very big floods, it doesn't make much difference. You see on the right-hand edge of that diagram, none of the measures make a very big difference. The really, really big floods are very hard to manage through natural methods. You can have some effect, but it's the small and medium floods that changing land management, building small ponds, introducing floodplain storage can be more effective. Next slide, please. And when we're thinking about managing flooding in this sort of catchment context, we need to look also at the downstream. So I've just shown you examples from more agricultural areas. Of course, the areas you're looking at in KL are downstream, close to sea level, urban areas, and you'll have seen something like this. You'll have certainly seen some of maps of Taman Sri Muda. You can see that you've got a very densely built up urban area with a range of commercial, industrial, residential buildings. You've also got highways going through and quite significant flood risk. And on the next slide, we see that location is in a particular context. You've got the main Klang River coming, but joining those two blue arrows, but you've got two tributaries joining the river in the or very close to the location you're looking at, as well as the infrastructure that we've talked about and the associated riverbank protection and straightening that has taken place. So you need to think about the particular place you're looking at, but where does it fit into the catchment? That tributary T1 joining the river directly opposite the area that you're interested in terms of flooding. How important is that tributary? If you do something on the tributary to change the timing of floodwaters in the tributary, could that help alleviate the flooding in the area that you're most concerned about? Next slide, please. And of course, you know that where you're looking at in KL is the downstream part of a larger river basin. This is quite an old map, but there are some questions you can ask yourself. How large is the catchment? Is the flow controlled at all? Could it be controlled more? Where are the tributaries and how are those tributaries contributing to flood generation? Often tributaries provide not just more water, but it's the timing. If the flood water in the tributary and the flood water in the main river happen at the same time, you get a big increase in the peak. Sometimes measures can be taken that will change one of those timings and therefore reduce the hazard. Where's the river been straightened or confined, and does that affect flooding? So what's the history? And maybe in a dense urban area, you can't do anything about that. You have to live with the river as it is today. But there may be some interventions that could be taken to modify some of that previous river engineering. And are there opportunities for interventions upstream to reduce flood risk in the area that you're interested in? So don't just think about your site, think about the context within which your site exists. Next slide, please. And you can conceptualize this. And again, this comes from the same student, Pammy Tolentino, part of her work. She's produced this diagram as a conceptual diagram, which is meant to apply to Southeast Asia. So it's developed in Philippines and it has a Southeast Asian context to it. At the left, you suggest that your headwater areas, you want them to behave as sponges. You want to keep the water there as long as possible. So you don't want to have water running off quickly into the river. Marshes, small ponds that are natural or maybe artificial are good things, and drainage for agricultural land maybe is less good, and maybe agricultural practices might need to change. And as you go downstream, you get into areas where you want to make sure the river is wide, is not confined too much, and where it's still connected with the floodplain, so that the floodplain can do what it should. It is a floodplain. Water gets stored on the floodplain during floods and therefore moves more slowly downstream and creates less problems in the urban areas. In those urban areas, blue-green infrastructure, green roofs, retention ponds, small flood detention basins in parks and so on have been used. There are good examples in Malaysia and Singapore you can find where small interventions can make a difference to flood risk. And of course, when you get right down to the coast, you've got to think about sea level rise. And really important you think about that in the longer term context. I think the site you're looking at is a little bit too far inland for that to be a major factor. But obviously sea level controls to some extent the flooding in the downstream area. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but do remember that all of the data you're dealing with, all of the information you're dealing with in terms of hydrology, there are always uncertainties. We never have enough data. And so you need to think carefully. The second bullet point there, think about how you can use different information sources. So you might get information from other places that are similar. You can get information from media reports, from talking to local people, from using different methods. So we never have enough data. We never have enough information. So you have to piece together information from different sources. Next slide, please. And of course, flood management doesn't take place just with scientists and engineers sitting in rooms deciding what to do. Community engagement is absolutely crucial. And in the context of your project, you might have limited opportunity to do that directly, but anything that is proposed, anything that you want to do that's different needs to be explained, and you need to bring the various stakeholders that you have in your community with you. And there's lots of different ways of doing this, and the examples on there are mainly from Philippines, although there's an Indonesia one and a China one as well, where in different ways we've tried to engage or with communities. The Indonesia one isn't us doing anything. That was just something we saw as we were driving by. Um, Communities are the people affected by the flooding, and they often know a lot about the best way to manage the river systems. And on the next slide, just some conclusions. Don't think of the river as a problem and something you've got to fix. Rivers are natural systems, and you need to think about ways of working with them. And rivers are they're different, and understand the local context, understand what that river is like naturally, what it's like today, and understand how it's connected and how the upstream and downstream link together. And in many ways, in the modern world where climate change is going to make flooding more frequent, preventing flooding is better than repairing afterwards. So we, as catchment managers, people are thinking very much about how do we prevent and how do we future-proof as well what we're doing. Remember that communities are stakeholders, but they're also knowledge holders. You can learn from the communities, and you've got to be thinking ahead. 10, 20, 50, 100 years. We know the environment is changing, climate is changing. How do we prepare for that? And on the next slide, if you're interested and want to know more, next slide, please. If you're interested in the technical side of hydrological data analysis and flow frequency analysis, on that YouTube channel there's a series of 8 lectures that Pammy and I gave for stakeholders in the Philippines a few years ago, which go through some of the methods that you might need to use and some of the issues. I'm not saying you have to look at those. You might find some of them useful. So they're there for information. And next slide. For now, thank you, and I look forward to questions later.
Thank you very much, Professor Trevor. Yes, thank you very much. I think that was very informative. I appreciated how you started off big and then zoomed into the Taman Sri Mudan. I think it was nice to also see how those different solutions mapped out, and then seeing how they act within the broader context, especially the impacts of the potentially solutions in different tributaries on the overall river. So I thought that was useful. I'm going to invite all participants to, if you have any questions, to post them in the Q&A box. We will get to them during the Q&A session right at the end. But if you have any questions, either for Professor Trevor or more generally about the challenge and the marathon, please post them in the Q&A box. All right. Well, next up, we have Sofia Castello, technical expert at Think City. Some of you may be aware, Think City is an impact organization and a special purpose subsidiary of Khazanah National. They are dedicated to making cities more people-friendly, resilient, and livable. Today, Sophia will share a living example of implementation of adaptation solutions in Malaysia with Think City's Penang Nature-Based Climate Adaptation Program. Sophia will provide an overview of the program, as well as examples of nature-based approaches for adaptation, which may give you some ideas for your own solutions. So without further ado, over to you, Sophia.
Thank you very much, Pri. Thank you for the invite. Good afternoon, everyone. Well done for joining this challenge. I'm going to share my screen. Sorry. Can you see it? Can you see clearly, or should I? You can see everything?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'm going to talk about the nature-based climate adaptation program for the urban areas of Penang Island, which was the first climate adaptation program developed for Malaysia. I'll talk about the program and then a little bit about climate-related flooding challenges and the nature-based solutions approach. So the program was initiated in 2019 by Think City, and it's focused on Penang, on identifying the main climate impacts in Penang, the main vulnerabilities, and use mostly nature-based solutions to reduce threats to human life, infrastructure, and property. It is science-driven in design, and it seeks to assess and share all impacts, reduction of impacts resulting from the program. So it was developed together with MBPP and JPS, and we've applied together with UN Habitat as a MIE, multilateral implementing entity, to the Adaptation Fund for $10 million, which we have received. So these are the entities involved. It's a 5-year duration program in terms of implementation. So it's started in 2022, so it's going to end probably in 2028. It's focused on Georgetown and Bayan La Paz in Penang Island. So the first thing the first thing we did was identify the challenges. The first challenge identified was heat stress. So the temperatures are rising, and Penang as an equatorial with its equatorial climate, as all Malaysia has, is very near the wet bulb threshold, which is a very dangerous line of balance between temperature and air humidity, that if we cross this line, humans cannot survive without air conditioning. So this is a very big concern for us. Second, flooding. Malaysia had in 2017 the heaviest rainfall registered. So it led to billion ringgit in damages and the loss of 7 lives. The third is social vulnerabilities. Third challenge was social vulnerability. So we had vulnerable communities exposed to flooding, disproportionately exposed to flooding and heat, and also women and girls clearly disproportionately impacted, and youth at the time unengaged. In terms of institutional capacity, most hospitals in Malaysia at that time did not identify heat stress and heat stroke. So officially, there were no deaths due to heat stroke. There was no municipality adaptation framework developed. The NAP, the National Adaptation Plan, is being developed as we speak, so it's not finalized. And there was no unit for disaster risk reduction. In terms of just sharing here some remote sensing data on surface temperatures, and you can see the urban heat, something that's called the urban heat island effect, which is a result of the hard materials of the city, because the solar radiation is absorbed by these hard materials which retain the heat and then release it at night. So it's much hotter in urban areas than in surrounding green or rural natural landscapes. And you can see here, when you zoom in on the city, you can see these linear patterns that are cooler. And we as humans instinctively kind of identify these as tree-lined streets, and we are correct. So we've also mapped surface temperatures on the ground. And we can see here, this on the left is a street in a cooler, greener part of the city. And on the right is in the very much in the center of the UNESCO core site, an area without much green. And you can see an increase of almost 30 degrees Celsius in surface temperatures. This is not the same as atmospheric temperatures. As for rainfall, so the Professor Trevor said something about the estimate of increase of rainfall, and it's correct, but not him from Malaysia has a more granular data on this. So they've identified an increase in the absolute volume of rainfall 15% in the past 40 years, since 1980. And of course, besides this, we have changes in rainfall patterns, so more concentrated rainfall. The flood in Penang led to multiple losses. And worst of all, loss of life. So actually, obviously, we need to adapt to prevent these losses. So this is the program. The result, the program is basically has four components addressing the four challenges. To use nature-based solutions, strategically introduce nature-based solutions, urban greening, to reduce temperatures and urban heat island effect, to use them to reduce and if possible, eliminate the number of flooding events. It's never possible to fully eliminate them, but we'll get there. To strengthen social resilience and vulnerable communities and women and girls. Fourth, institutional capacity in public health reinforced. So we have a pilot program for detection of heat stress and heat stroke and other vector-borne diseases related, climate-related diseases. The creation of a knowledge platform for sharing the knowledge with all municipalities in Malaysia. And we also have a climate resilient urban tree species study developed. And this is the program, basically. So you can see here in stormwater management, we have three typologies: blue-green corridors, upstream retention, and swells and infiltration wells. The outcome of the program, the desired outcome is a reduction of 1.5 degrees Celsius in all temperatures in all urban areas, and 5 to 7 degrees in shaded areas 6 to 8 years after completion. Improved government knowledge and capacity to reduce and manage climate impacts, reduced GDP losses due to flooding, reduced impact on public health, improved understanding of heat-related diseases, improved community readiness, reduced vulnerability asymmetries in community, and most importantly, the development of a framework for urban adaptation to be mainstream to all other cities in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. So we had many events, exhibitions. You can see here the exhibition about the Penang Nature-Based Climate Adaptation Program with the challenges, engaging the community. As Professor mentioned, the community is indeed a knowledge holder. I would say low-income community, the vulnerable communities are the most important ones in our opinion, not in our opinion, in our verified opinion, because we found out that they have the most acute understanding of what's happening because they are not buffered from climate impacts. Here, in community engagement, and we had focus group discussions, technical discussions. We've learned substantially, and we were very lucky because the program has received many awards. This was the first award. It received the award for the best climate program in the world in 2020. So it was very fast. Since then, we've received one more award, and more importantly, we've received the $10 million for implementation. As Professor mentioned, floods here are considered the main challenge in Malaysia strategically, right? But I would say I'm very concerned with heat also. But this webinar is about flooding. So what I would like to point out here is that indeed, yes, we have an increase in volume of rainfall as the main climate-related weather challenges. We have changes in rainfall patterns, so we have more concentrated rainfall and prolonged droughts. And finally, we have a sea level rise that at the moment is estimated at 4 millimeters per year. And these challenges are compounded by urbanization challenges. Just some brief press. So we're Peninsular Malaysia hit by 1 in 100-year rainfall event. We're going to see this more and more. All records are being broken. Malaysia's worst flooding in years with 30,000 people displaced, massive flash floods in Shalam. And also, we sometimes think too much about flooding from the point of view of damaging infrastructure, but it affects food security. And this is a very big challenge also. And I've noticed in 2020, this actually I captured in 2020, wet weather affecting greens. At the time, scientific studies were saying that we would reach this point in 2025 or 2030 when food was going to start costing more. But no, it was earlier. Of course, it affects. I don't like to talk too much about GDP, to be honest, because it's this economic system we live in. And I live in the material world. I live in the world of people and houses and floodplains. But actually, you can translate all these impacts to money and to GDP impacts. But this is a big threat. This is again, this is the direct quote from him. The volume of rainfall increasing 15% in the past 40 years in Malaysia. The estimates using RCP 4.5, which is an average, not too bad, not too good scenario for climate projection. Estimate for Malaysia in 2050 says that the rainfall increase by 2050 will be 18.1%. So just to say that this is this is not progressing in a positive, very optimistic. There's no reason for being too optimistic about rainfall in Malaysia. The thing is, this is an example from Thailand, the December 2021 floods. Again, 1 billion in damages. It's important to understand that flooding has multiple causes, and obviously the big cause is rainfall. And then the second cause is the catchment and how the water flows in the catchment. But urbanization plays a very big role because you have paved areas that cannot infiltrate, water cannot infiltrate. So it flows downstream and it keeps accelerating and then it stops. And that's what a flood actually is. So here, Malaysia is one of the, I believe Malaysia is the fastest, is the most urbanized country in Southeast Asia. I believe so. But if not the top, it's one of the most urbanized countries in Southeast Asia. So there are many problems that come from this. And here are just some of the challenges. I'm going back to the Penang program now. Sorry, going back and forth, but I think it's important to explain things better. There is a challenge that I find particularly interesting from my point of view. So you can see here the map of the flood hazard in Penang, and you can see the darker areas are the areas that have higher levels of flooding. And basically, from an analysis point of view, you need to work with these areas to avoid the water accumulating in these areas. Problem is, when you're in a coastal area and you have typical drainage infrastructure, what happens is that with sea level rise, I know it sounds little, 4 millimeters per year, it grows slightly year by year. It's accelerating. The growth is accelerating, by the way, also. What happens that if you have a high tide and a storm surge and a heavy rainfall at the same time, what may happen, and has already happened, is that the drainage infrastructure functions, inverts direction. So the infrastructure becomes the vessel for flooding the city. And this is going to get only worse and worse with sea level rise. With time passing, sea level rise is going to get higher and higher. There's no doubt about it. And the existing completely rigid infrastructure, there's nothing we can do about it either, except, build it all over again higher. But just to gain 20 centimeters, it's a challenge. This is just an explanation of this problem of the infrastructure, of the traditional gray infrastructure, a little bit better. And what I wanted to point out is the only thing you can do in this solutions, in this circumstance, is to retain the water upstream. You cannot let the water go into the drains when you have a situation like this, right? And this is where nature-based solutions come up. And basically, this is a definition. I'm not sure if this is definition of the World Bank, but nature-based solutions are actions to address societal challenges that are inspired by processes and functions of nature. Basically, what this means is that it's working with the territory and the natural dynamics of the territory instead of just in our fixed human Am I still on time? I'm okay with time, right? I'm almost over.
No, you're okay. Don't worry. Maybe like three
So
more minutes.
actually, okay, wonderful. Just on time then. So we can actually reduce temperatures between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius with strategically urban green areas. This is what we're doing in Penang. In one specific tree, we've already we've already reduced 2 degrees Celsius, so that's exciting. But also nature-based solutions like the sponge cities, which you probably heard of, which is a concept developed in China, that allow the water to have its own dynamic and safeguarding it and allow dynamics of landscape to safeguard urban areas, basically. So this is an approach. It's I hate to give just a technical definition of nature-based solutions because we need to understand this is bigger than this. We need to go back to nature to work with nature's systems. So again, still in the Penang program, we have different typologies of green spaces for urban greening to reduce temperatures, tree-lined streets, pocket parks, and so on. And for stormwater management, we have upstream retention ponds, wood green corridors that actually also work as upstream retention ponds on some areas. And downstream, where very little can be done and we don't have much space, swales and infiltration wells. The sponge cities in China, here you can see like China has gone full on this. They've gone like massive. The thing is, there was this huge floods in 2021 because they had a big anomaly in rainfall. And when there's a big anomaly, like Professor Trevor mentioned, there's really nothing you can do. But we're planning um, for the average events. These are some examples. Also, the amount of benefits you have from working with nature are incredible. You improve well-being, you improve health at all levels. And you can only, and you also you create jobs, but you create jobs that are not carbon CO2 producing jobs. And people sometimes don't spell it out loud, but building gardens does not produce CO2 as other jobs. And of course, you build physical adaptation because these places absorb and store the water. You build government capacity and community preparedness. And also, again, the translation into benefits that I so dislike, but I must present them specifically to policymakers. So you have like the translation into benefits of benefits into ringgit. And you see projects, not in China, one in Colombia and the other one in Singapore. And you have in Singapore 180 million ringgits in capital savings, and 3.6 times increase in socioeconomic value, and so on. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. And best of luck, all the luck with the challenge.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I think that was a pretty comprehensive presentation. I like the Sponge City introduction and how we have to learn to work with nature. I think we're seeing a lot of developments in and around the Klang Valley, and I think that build up, I don't think we realize how much that affects the surface runoff and how much actually gets to go back into the soil. So I think thinking about that as students start to come up with their solutions will be quite critical. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left and we're going into the Q&A session. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce everyone to Puan Nini Shazrina. She is a director at Landasan Lumayan Sendirian Berhad. I think some of you may be familiar with LLSB from your site visit not earlier this week, but late last week, where you were able to visit the challenge site and actually see the problems on the ground. So we've got a few questions that were submitted prior to the webinar, as well as that we have in the Q&A session. So we're going to go through them, and then please continue to put your questions in the Q&A, whether you want to direct them to specific speakers or just have general questions, and we'll try our best to answer them. So first up, we have a question for Professor Trevor. Dr. Hoy, would splitting a river into channels help to reduce the risk of flooding?
Yes and no. It depends on how much space you've got. have you got space for that? But also, it, what it what naturally would the river look like? So you want to work with nature, not against nature. Um, and answering that question is often quite difficult because you see the river today, and there's been hundreds of years of human intervention around the river. When you use historical data, the oldest maps you can find, and geological data and so on, you often find that rivers that we think of as single channels, meandering rivers, naturally would be much wider and shallower. And we see that in many parts of the world because humans have been narrowing rivers for so long. So look at the natural, see if you can work out what the river would look like naturally, work towards its natural shape. And if its natural shape is wide with multiple channels, then that's great if you have the space to do it. And quite often you don't have the space to do it. Without going into over technical details, when engineers design the width of a river channel, it's actually quite a difficult thing to get right if you're doing this in an artificial way. You can create problems if you get the width wrong because sediment can build up in the rivers. And so you build the river bed level up, and so you then make the flooding worse. So you have to be a little bit careful when designing any change of shape of the river to make sure that you fully understand what the consequences of that might be.
Thank you, Professor Trevor. Next up, we have a question for Puan Nini. What improvements have been made to the area since the previous 2021 floods? What is the current progress and effectiveness of those measures? And are basic flood infrastructures already in place? And what caused the tidal gate failure during the 2021 flood? You have about 4 questions there within that one question, but I'll let you take it in turns.
All right. Thanks, Pri. Okay. In terms of improvements that have been made, since the flood in 2021, we have done a bund upgrading at the area, which increased the level at about an average of 2 meters. We also done slope protection as well as deepening of the river to increase capacity of the river. And in terms of effectiveness, I think since the improvements that have been made, it has lowered the risk of flood in that area. And the project is still ongoing. And in terms of what else? Sorry. What caused the tidal gate failure? Basically, it's just power supply cut. Because when the flood happens, it cut off the power supply to the tidal gate. So hence, you're not able to operate the tidal gate during the flood.
And so I guess, Puan Nini, a question, a follow-up on that, on the tidal gates. Is that a solution that has been solved already? Or is this something that the students should be trying to solve in terms of this power cut?
Oh, for that, JPS has installed genset at the tidal gate. So in the future, if there's a power supply cut, then the they will use genset to operate the tidal gate.
Okay.
And the
Thank you.
pump.
Okay. So both for the genset, for the tidal gate, and the pump, yeah, that's there and that has been solved. So hopefully that is able to support future ones. The next one is for Sophia. I think getting your views since you've sort of led and pioneered a project and actually looked at it from problem to inception and planning right up to implementation. I guess for people starting out with this competition and not necessarily sure how to even begin addressing it, they've been given the challenge site of that Jalan Sri Kandi along Sungai Rasau, feeding into the Klang River in Taman Sri Muda. They know all the problems associated with flooding, but as someone who's actually developed some sort of solution, how do you go about addressing that problem? Where do you begin?
Yeah. You begin by identifying the problem and getting the best possible data to understand it. I'm going to share here because there are many online free tools that you can use. So I'm going to share them with you. I'm going to share a sea level map for the entire world for 2050 by Climate Central, and I'm going to share a little treat for you, which is an amazing platform called the AP the adaptation platform that has 70 something free tools that you can use to identify problems, and you'll find that all will have the data from Malaysia. So I think this is the first thing. You need to understand the problem. You need to look at things uh, from a very practical approach. What is the problem? What can I do about the problem? What there is a reliable adversary in the sense that is a very predictable adversary. A professor mentioned that we have to work with nature, not against nature, but we have to work with nature, not against nature, because nature will always win, especially water. You cannot fight water. And anyone who has a problem with an infiltration at home knows that water will always win, you know? So I would say that's just working with it, respecting it, understanding the dynamics of the challenge, and also being open to what is happening. Don't fix. You need to have innovation throughout projects. I'm going to give a very short example, if I may, Pri. Okay, so we've started in our community engagements in 2019 and 2020. We've started our community engagements by the workshops and focus group discussions with policymakers, community representatives, experts or people from the community, but with a specific standing. All of them said the biggest problem Penang faced was flooding. 100% of them. And then we went to low-income communities, and this was a completely different methodology with people speaking the dialects. I did not go there because it's a completely different setting. And when they came back, the team that went to these communities, when they came back, it was a moment of review because the low-income communities identified heat stress as their bigger problem. And I was dumbfounded, what is happening here? Can you go back and ask them, is flooding not a problem to you? Why are you identifying heat stress as the bigger problem? And they went back, and when they returned, they said, well, they said that flooding is a very big problem, yes, but it's once a year. Heat is every day. And at that moment, I realized that everyone, including myself, in the workshops, in the focus groups discussions, we lived in air-conditioned spaces. We traveled in air-conditioned means of transportation, and we worked in air-conditioned spaces. And actually, those people, the low-income people that don't have air conditioning, they were the ones saying it's much hotter now than 10 years ago. Okay, so be open, look at the data, respect the force, especially the force of water. Respect it, you will never win against it. Search for alternative, keep curious, stay curious. That's your biggest asset. Keep searching, there's always new resource. I'm going to share it with you here. Stay curious and stay open to what you're listening and understanding what things really mean. For instance, because I was struggling with what this really meant, with the difference in the opinion in the low income communities and the experts, because I was thinking what this means is not that low income communities must be prioritized because they are most exposed. No, it's because they have more knowledge. And this shift is very substantial. Okay, thank you. I've shared the two resources. Best of luck. I really hope you can use them for your challenge.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I am going to take a couple questions on the financing angle. So I'm going to put them together. We've got one question that asks, are there any resources that we can rely on when estimating and calculating the cost for each component? Do we need to include citations and references for them in our final submission? You should refer to any sources that you do consider in your final submission. It's good for you to benchmark if you're able to find costs online, or able to see solutions with approximate costing that you can then refer to for your benchmarking. That would be great. So yes, the answer is yes. We have another question on the financing that asks, can you share a bit more about the finance part, such as should the financial model include certification cost or issuance cost of the green bond? Yes, that is something that you should include in your financial model. We want to emphasize that your solution, and we've responded to this in the other Q&As, your solution needs to be financially viable, and you should include a capital market financing plan. You can use a range of capital market financing instruments that includes, bonds, sukuk. You also have other forms of private equity and venture capital financing. So to consider those when you are putting together your, for example, blended finance structures or models. In terms of modeling timelines, someone has asked if we should estimate maintenance and repayment for 30-year or 50-year periods to align with national adaptation goals. The challenge brief does not prescribe the timeline on which you need to plan for maintenance repayment. Ultimately, we want to see, and your judges want to see, how that maintenance cost is factored in, and it's up to you to decide what is a good timeline to be able to show or tell your assessors to convince them that your solution is indeed financially viable and will be financially sustainable. For renewable energy sales, the rate at which you will sell the electricity, you will have to look at other benchmarks and other sort of rates that you can find either online or through TNB or other rates, and then try and approximate. Otherwise, if you are making assumptions, make sure you document those assumptions. We don't want numbers coming out of nowhere and they're not able to tell how you've arrived at your numbers. I think we have a question for Professor Trevor. So the question is, the question seems to have disappeared.
That might be the one I've just typed an
Okay.
answer to.
Okay.
So
Then,
the question was about, could you increase the velocity of the
yes.
flow to reduce flooding? So what I've typed, and you can read, is that increasing the velocity of the flow will reduce the water level, and so you could use that to reduce flood risk. However, by doing that, you transfer the water more quickly to the next part of the river downstream. So you're likely to have made the problem worse somewhere else. So you may have solved your problem and created a bigger problem somewhere else. So you've got to be very, very careful with anything that speeds water up. Also, increasing velocity may lead to erosion. You might have erosion of the riverbed or banks. So you've got to be very careful if you accelerate the water flow and that leads to erosion of a bridge, for example, you've then got to repair the bridge. So generally speaking, speeding the water up is not a good idea.
All right. And then I think our last question before we conclude today was actually a series of questions. I think we've answered that there is no rough budget range. Puan Nini, I'm not sure if you are able to either share or advise on example costs from past flood works at the site or maybe around Selangor, if you're able to share that, and if not, whether you're able to point students in the direction of maybe going about finding that.
In terms of the ongoing flood mitigation project costs that we are currently embarking, it's around 349 million for 24-kilometer stretch of the river. That's the one that is currently ongoing under SMG.
Okay, thanks, Bonin. And I'm assuming that includes all the activities that you were mentioning before, including the bank strengthening, the dredging.
Yes, inclusive.
Yeah. All right, so that gives you an overview of the site and the costs that they've deployed for past flood works. Flood data we have put in the chat that you may visit. I think LLSB has shared a live link where you're able to access flood data. Simulation tools can help you to score better. It's not required. But rather, I think instead of asking, does using simulation tools help you to score better? I think a better response would be that we appreciate evidence-based approaches. We want to see that the proposed solutions you are providing are actually answering the problem at hand. I think as Sophia mentioned, the first step is really to understand what is the problem and what can you do about it. And so part of understanding what that problem is using the tools available to you to understand that, whether that's models, whether that's publicly available data, that's up to you. Should the video be more like promotion style or more like a technical presentation? It should be more like a technical presentation, but we leave it to the discretion of teams. Ideally, you are explaining your solution in a evidence-based but persuasive manner so that your assessors understand what exactly are you proposing on the technical side and also the financing side. And then I think the last question to wrap us up was what made past winning teams stand out from the rest? So during the COFAR challenge, a real strength was that you had your engineering and your finance students coming together, sitting down and trying to figure out how to propose a solution. We heard from the financiers that the engineers they sat down with would propose solutions and never figure out how much they actually costed, and it frustrated them. The engineers sat down and said, the financiers keep asking me for numbers, but they don't understand that it takes this, and this to make it work. So we strongly suggest you sit down in a room with your team members, thrash it out, and figure out a way that is both physically, technically viable and also financially viable. The strongest solutions we had were grounded in evidence. They really understood what the problem was there. They considered any potential maladaptation risk. They considered what were the benefits of their solutions in the short, medium, and long term. And they really helped address the problem while delivering benefits for project owner, for the site, and for the communities around. So we'll leave you with that. We'll keep that in mind. I want to thank once again Professor Trevor Hoy, Sophia, and Puan Nini for your time today. And I hope that for the students, this was instructive to you in helping you go about starting to craft your solutions ahead of your checkpoint 2 on 30th of June 2026. With that, I think we call this to a close. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Best of luck.